Revenue Amendment Number 4, Bill 2017.
This Council now resumes the second reading debate on the Inland Revenue Amendment Number 7, Bill 2017. The Honourable Holden Chow, Chairman of the Bills Committee on the bill, will address the Council on the committee's report. The Honourable Holden Chow. Madam Deputy, on behalf of the Bills Committee of the Inland Revenue Amendment Number Bill 2017, I'll now report on the Bills Committee's deliberations and our highlights of our work. The bill aims to amend the Inland Revenue Ordinance to implement the two-tier profits tax system as announced in the policy address on the August of 2017. The new profits tax will apply to the tax year starting 1st of April 2018. The Bills Committee has held 2 meetings. We have invited members of the public, including the relevant stakeholders, to give views on the bill. The Bills Committee's members generally support the bill, and the members note that deputations which have given views are also generally in support of the two-tiered profits tax regime. Now, the bill suggests that the profits tax for the first Hong Kong $2 million of profits of corporations will be lowered to 8.25%. That is half of the existing profits tax rate. And the profits above that amount will continue to be subject to the tax rate of 16.5%. For incorporated businesses, the two-tiered tax rates would correspondingly be set at 7.5% and 15%. A tax-paying corporation or unincorporated business may save up to $165,000 and $150,000 each year, respectively. Members also inquired about the financial implications of tax revenue and economy, including whether it would in fact narrow Hong Kong's tax base. The government expects that the tax revenue forgone under the regime would be about $5.8 billion per year, or around 4% of the total profits tax. The administration pointed out that as the proposal only reduces the rates of chargeable assessable profits, it will not change or narrow the tax base. The Bills Committee has inquired about the rationale for proposing an upper limit and setting it at the first Hong Kong $2 million of assessable profits. The government set of all the 135,800 enterprises which have to pay tax, 111,900 enterprises in Hong Kong had accessible profits of Hong Kong $2 million or below, and many of these are SMEs, are startups. To ensure that these are the targets of our tax benefits, the government believes that the proposal is reasonable. The members are also concerned about the restrictions on connected entities, and that is the connected entities can only nominate one enterprise to benefit from the lower tax rate. The bills suggest that 50% is adopted as a threshold if an entity owns 50% or more of the rights or profits of another entity. It means the former is in control of the latter, and connected relationship is determined by their status at the end of the basis period for a particular year of assessment. Some members also believe that imposing restrictions in relation to connected entities may complicate the profits tax system and undermine Hong Kong's competitive edge of having a simple tax regime. The administration stresses that the eligibility criteria is based on the amount of accessible profits, and a simple definition of connected entity prescribed by the bill are meant to simplify the operation of the proposed regime and minimize both administrative and compliance burden. Members have sought clarification from the administration on the scope of connected entities under different scenarios. Members also are concerned about whether a group of companies jointly owned by relatives like brothers, sisters, spouses, and children are regarded as connected entities if each person owns or controls no more than 50% of the interest or profits in each of the companies in question. The legal advisor also pointed out that as the concept of relative is not used in the proposed definition of connected entity in the bill, and this is in contrast with the use of the term in other parts of the existing IRO, for example, Section 14A bracket 4 and 40G bracket 1 in relation to the definition of associate. The administration has advised that when defining the term associate in other anti-abuse provisions of IRO, the concept of relative is usually adopted so as to prevent profits from shifting to companies controlled by relatives like spouse and children. For the proposed two-tier profits tax rate regime, the policy intent is to reduce the tax burden of owned enterprises, especially SMEs. Given that members of the same family may run different businesses independently, it is reasonable to apply the proposed lower tax rate to each of them. In response to members' requests, the administration has advised in writing the tax treatments in a number of scenarios. Some members are also concerned about that enterprises may use strategies to abuse the system. For example, segregate business, transfer shares, and redistribute profits, or conduct businesses through natural persons and sole proprietors and not a group of connected entities. The administration said that business amalgamation is a normal activity and people have to consider the cost effectiveness of doing so. Generally speaking, such commercial activities will not be seen as tax avoidance activities. The Bills Committee urges the government to keep a close watch on the situation to make sure that enterprises will abide by the law and, if necessary, amend the legislation to crack down on abusive behavior. The bill notes that in order to avoid double benefits, the administration has proposed that the following would be excluded from, say, A, enterprises electing the existing preferential half rate regimes, and B, the assessable profits for sums received by or accrued to holders of qualifying debt instruments, QDI, and as interest gain or profit for which already taxed at half rate. These two scenarios will continue to benefit from the existing tax rate 7.5%. Bills Committee has also raised concern about the assessment of profits arising from QDI and assessable profits other than arising from QDI. The government explained that assessable profits from business unrelated to QDI will be chargeable to profits tax at the two-tier rates, and the policy instead that QDI-related profits will not be counted towards a cap of Hong Kong $2 million of assessable profits. Now, after taking into consideration the legal advice's views, the government will move a CSA to make sure that the drafting clearly reflects the policy intent. The Bills Committee has also asked the Secretary to explain the above policy intent during the second reading debate. The government emphasizes that the proposed tax regime meets with the best interests of the taxpayers, and as a result, there will not be any disputes to be raised by taxpayers. Despite this, the IRD undertakes that when the two-tier system is being implemented, it will provide the relevant guidelines through its website to help taxpayers fill up the tax returns. The Bills Committee will not raise any CSAs to the bill, and we support the CSAs moved by the government. And the Bills Committee supports the resumption of the second reading debate of the bill. Madam Deputy, the following is my view on the bill. Madam Deputy, for this two-tiered profits tax system, in the past, whether it's myself or members from the DAB have repeatedly said that the government should care more about the SMEs. And this two-tiered tax system is a response from the government towards the requests made by the SMEs in the past. I welcome that the government put this in the policy address. And during the scrutiny of the bill in the Bills Committee, members have raised questions on the details. And one of it has to do with this amount, $2 million as a line to be drawn. And some members have asked, how did you come up with this line, this $2 million? Another question raised by members, many members, including yourself, Madam Deputy, is for this two-tiered system and the concessions, and there is no restriction on where this 2 million profits comes from, what kind of business are generating this profit. Say if it is the company is speculating on properties and get the profit, and under the bill now it seems that it is still entitled to the tax concession. At the Bills Committee, different members expressed different views, because this two-tiered profit tax system is meant to benefit enterprises, especially SMEs who are engaged in real transactions, so that they can enjoy tax concessions, they can have, they are in a better position to expand their business. But if you are talking about speculation activities of properties, and the profits there can still enjoy the tax exemption, then it seems it is not in line with the policy intent. Of course, during the Bills Committee, this worry has been expressed by some members. And another point raised also by myself too is that for enterprises earning this $2 million in profits, you set the line at $2 million. It seems that you are not specifying the number of employees in these enterprises. There is no restriction in that regard. In other words, from the perspective of the SME, of course, the more employees they hire, the more jobs they create. Shouldn't they be granted more concessions? Say, if this is as an SME hiring 2 people and another SME hiring 20 people, they are entitled to the same tax concessions. If we want to encourage more companies to create more jobs so that more people can be hired, shouldn't it be the case that the more employees an SME has, the more concessions it should enjoy? I mean, this is a point that I raised during the deliberations of the Bills Committee, and I hope that the government can pay heed to our views, and maybe in the future you can consider this point further. Another point that I would like to make, that during the Bills Committee's deliberations, we have said many times about the connected entities. And the line that we have drawn is 50% of our rights or shares. But different members have said that there might be a loophole to that approach. Say, if companies willfully try to circumvent the regulation, they can maneuver the 50% ownership. Now, let me cite an example. Say, if a company, a major shareholder, holds 35% of the shares, while the small investors are holding a smaller percentage of the shares. So, in other words, he is a major shareholder, and to a certain extent, he is controlling the company. But through, say, business redistribution and restructuring, so etc., every major shareholder can hold less than 50% of the shares, and they still have control of the company, so that they can make use of such a loophole to enjoy the tax concessions. So we have raised this point repeatedly at the Bills Committee, and at today's meeting, I feel obliged to mention the same point again. And I hope that the government can consider again this view of ours. Now, after the law commences operation, please watch out whether there are people abusing such loopholes through company restructuring. They can enjoy, a series of companies can be entitled to the tax concessions. And last but not least, I would like to say that this two-tiered profit system has been a response to a long-standing request of SMEs, but the world around, including even the US, have raised tax reduction measures hoping to enhance their competitive edge, to attract more enterprises to invest in their own countries. Recently, we have launched a number of tax measures to encourage businesses to do more business in Hong Kong. Say, for example, aircraft leasing will be able to enjoy a lower tax rate. They will be paying half the tax rate, and this time round is SMEs enjoying half the profits tax concessions. For such tax reduction measures, I think we should not stop here. I hope that the government can continue to look at different sectors in Hong Kong. We want to provide more tax concessions to a particular industry to help enhance its competitive edge, then we should do so. That includes a high value-added shipping industry as well. I hope that the government can pay heed to my views, so I speak.
Mr. Ray Chan. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I speak to oppose to the Inland Revenue Amendment Number 7, Bill 2017. The bill seeks to change the profits tax regime that has been in place for many years. It aims to reduce profits tax. I have spoken about my stance previously. The administration says that the introduction of this change will alleviate tax burden on SMEs, especially startups, which is conducive to creating a favorable business environment, promoting economic benefits, as well as enhancing Hong Kong's competitiveness. Of the merits, 4 merits they have set out, I do think that 3 of them are exaggerated, because a company will only save about $100,000 of tax. Can it really achieve that much? And I would like the public to know that the 2 tiers profit tax rates regime does not necessarily mean that if you make a profit of $2 million and less, you will be able to have the profits tax rates half. For the first $2 million, there will be profits tax rates of 8.25% and 7.5%, which is 50% of the original profits tax rate. So whether the company makes under 2 million, above 2 million, or $1 or $2 billion, you can only enjoy 50% of the original profits tax rate for the first $2 million. There are a lot of problems. And I would like to say that, first of all, it is a bad precedent. And 2, if it benefits all enterprises, it is very unfair. And the logic runs counter to the government's philosophy on financial management. The administration wants to introduce this 2-tier profits tax rate regime. All enterprises will enjoy the halving of the profits tax rate by paying, say, 8.25%. I say this is a bad precedent because for a lot of industries, there are tax alleviations or concessions, say, for example, aircraft leasing. For a very long time, SMEs have been asking for profits tax rates to be halved. In order to get more support from the business sector, because there are only 1,200 people in the election committee, and most of them are from the business sector. So she said that for the $2 billion, the profits tax rate will be lowered to under 10%. She was elected, and she gave more than she promised. It's not just below 10%. It's going to be 8.25%. I am concerned that, for trade associations claiming to represent SMEs, put pressure on the administration, and as a result, profits tax rate is cut. Will there be more stakeholders leaning on the administration asking for various tax concessionary measures? Well, if overseas chambers of commerce put pressure on the government to ask for further reduction of profits tax rate, will it happen? We have asked questions before. Hong Kong's tax rates on profits tax is already low enough. If you want to cut profits tax rate to enhance our competitiveness or to compete with our competitors, how are you supposed to do that? In the US, there was a recent announcement that profits tax will be lowered to 21%. In the UK, by 2020, it will be lowered to 17%. In Japan, in 2018, companies' profits tax will be reduced from 23.4% in 2016 to 23.2%. So if you compete along these cutthroat lines, then it is not just $2 million to enable companies to save just 100,000 or so. The next step is to further lowering the profits tax in order to make it a promotion of Hong Kong's attractiveness internationally. Madam Deputy, don't you think that the administration has exaggerated somewhat, saying that this will make Hong Kong a preferred investment location? So the administration said that, there is a global trend of reduction of profits tax rates, as well as there is pressure from trade associations. That's why they introduced this new regime. And it's only a small gesture, just the first $2 million. But would it not serve as a precedent? In the future, capitalists or trade associations, chambers of commerce will ask for various tax cuts. Of course, you now have a lot of money. And it's the case that all companies in Hong Kong will enjoy the 50% profits tax rate for the first $2 million in profit. Isn't that unfair? By the standard of the administration, not mine. For the first 2 million accessible profits, there will be a cut to 8.25% or 7.5%. So, regardless of the amount of profit you have made for the first $2 million, you enjoy this tax cut. For companies who only make a profit of several hundreds of thousands dollars, of course, and this will reduce their tax burden by reducing their operation cost. But for companies enjoying billions of profits a year, a few hundred thousands of dollars is pittance. They don't really need that. Well, I would like to ask you a question if you think I'm not convincing enough. How come that, when it comes to cash payout, $10,000 to all citizens, like people power advocates, well, then the administration will say someone with a lot of money like Li Ka-shing can still get the $10,000. Is it fair? So I would like you to ask you the same question.
For enterprises earning billions of dollars, they're still entitled to this half profits tax rate in the first $2 million in profits. So is this a kind of fair policy? If you think that for the first 2 million of profits, half the profits tax rate will be levied. If you think that companies making, say, hundreds of thousands of dollars in profits can benefit, and they are allowed to pay half rate only, why don't you adopt the same thinking? Why don't you give a cash handout of $6,000 to everyone in Hong Kong? Then everyone can benefit. And you don't have to go through, say, a means test, don't have to come up with a set of criteria. The government is having double standards here. So whether it's members who oppose cash handouts, you would vote for the bill, right? For all companies, the first 2 million profits will be subject to a half profit tax rate. So based on this same logic, you should not be opposing a cash handout of $6,000. You should also be objecting to enterprises earning billions of dollars in profits can enjoy this half profits tax rate. You shouldn't be haggling over every penny with them. You come up with a number of figures, the total number of companies involved, and you say that the tax revenue forgone would just be 4%. So why don't you just support cash handouts for everyone? Today's the newspapers have carried reports about the CCF plugging the loopholes in the system. The criterion is that you have an income of $15,000, you don't own a flat, etc. I'm not talking about the nitty-gritties here with you. I'm talking about the major principles. If you look at this in an in-depth manner, I think it's having a cash handout for everyone is more reasonable than having this two-tier profits tax regime here. Now, the rich man won't come to you to get the $6,000. In fact, when that was done in the past, some people didn't show up to get the $6,000, and as a result, the money went back to the public coffers. But this is different here for this profits tax regime. For the first $2 million in profits, it will be entitled to the half profits tax rate automatically. Maybe the senior management couldn't care less. They couldn't refuse or decline such an arrangement. For those capitalists said that the money will be a waste, it will not stimulate the economy. That kind of argument doesn't hold water. The government says that it will help stimulate economic development and enhance Hong Kong's competitive edge. The enterprises can use the money saved up to enhance their hardware and software and enhance their overall performance, and that will bring in extra tax in the future for the government. Isn't that kind of a kind of exaggeration? Now, for the $100,000 saved, you will be enhancing, upgrading your hardware, software, and you will boost your overall operation efficiency, which in turn could bring in additional tax revenue in future. Come on. You are overstating the situation, I think. For those who have this kind of argument, how can you ensure that this saved tax savings will stimulate the economy? Would you conduct a survey among the SMEs? Would they be actually, the SMEs, be increasing the pay for their employees, or would they be giving up dividends to the shareholders? I don't see anything like that happening. I'm not objecting for the objection's sake. I have some suggestions here. I have suggested that if enterprises earns less than $2 million in profit, then okay, they are entitled to the half profits tax rate. It can help them, and that can help the government's objective. The lower tax rates would reduce the tax burden on enterprises, especially SMEs and startup enterprises. That's indisputable. Well, another function which works, C, the lower tax rates would also benefit the more successful social enterprises by alleviating their tax burden. The tax saved would enable these enterprises to pursue their social objective, for example, enhancing the services and creating more jobs and training opportunities for the socially disadvantaged. All right, I agree that that may be the objective which which can be achieved. If we're talking about enterprises earning a profit of less than $5 million, the first $2 million should be entitled to half tax rate, and for the remainder, I think the profit should be subject to the normal profit tax rate. But for those earning a profit of over $5 million, I think all of the accessible profits should be subject to the existing profit tax rate. I think this is what I would call a targeted approach, and that can benefit the SMEs. The government has always been sticking to this targeted approach. So if everybody can enjoy this $2 million tax concession, then it's not a targeted approach. And also the profit-making large enterprises can show them more social responsibility if that is the approach. And that would not be unnecessary tax leakage and the loss of tax revenue on the part of government. The government refuses to heed these views. If you support this, but then you are objecting to across-the-board cash handouts, and you are just giving the money to the rich, and the poor will only be poorer, and they will feel being neglected by the government. Mr. Vincent Zhang. Thank you, Madam Deputy. This is the 20 bills, Inland Revenue Amendment Number 7 bill, and that is to implement the election manifesto of the CE to set up a two-tier profit tax system. There is a half tax for the first $2 million of profits. I think the bill can help lessen the tax burden of enterprises, individuals, especially it can help promote the development of SMEs. Why do we have to draw a line at $2 million and not $1 million or $3 million or other amounts? I think there can be no golden rules to go by, but in 2015-16, there are 111,900 enterprises in Hong Kong had accessible profits of $2 million or below, and they contributed about 4% of the total profits tax of $140 billion. 96% of the profits tax was contributed by some 23,900 enterprises with accessible profits above $2 million. In other words, 82.4% enterprises among all tax-paying enterprises had accessible profits of Hong Kong $2 billion or below. So using that yardstick can cover many SMEs and startups. And also there is certain restriction when there is a connected entities, a subsidiary company of a group company. These group company can only nominate one company to enjoy the tax concessions. Say if 20% of tax-paying enterprises are connected entities, now implementing this two-tier system will mean that the government will have a tax revenue foregone of $5.8 billion. And that is 4% of the total profits tax it received in 2016-17. The public coffers are flushed with money, but despite that, the tax reduction has only slight impact on the government's financial situation. The two-tier system is a good start, and it can help improve the business environment for SMEs. Now, after the bill is passed, the government must carefully monitor the implementation of the measure, especially it has to watch over abuse. For example, enterprises might have their business restructured just to avoid the relevant regulations, and they try to get the most tax concessions. That will bring negative impact on the tax revenue of the government. If that happens, the government must need to perfect the implementation of the system. For example, redefining the definition of connected entities. There are also suggestions that for profit-making large conglomerates, a progressive tax system should be implemented on them. I think a simple low-tax regime is an advantage of Hong Kong, and if we maintain it at profits tax at 16.4%, and that will do every good to Hong Kong's competitiveness. When the public coffers are flushed with money, and the government can do a lot in, say, poverty alleviation and so on. And there is, at this juncture, no need to levy more on profits tax. The two-tier profits tax system can be conducive to the development of SMEs and startups. At the same time, the government must provide more support measures for these enterprises and encourage people to start their own business and also join the INT sector. When I was in the election campaign, my election manifesto said that the government should also co-share data and help the SMEs and startups in their procurement exercises. The government must also actively consider setting up the Cultural Heritage Foundation to encourage young people to learn traditional arts and crafts and join the relevant sectors so that we can promote the development of local creative industries. So I speak. Mr. Kenneth Leung. Madam Deputy, this is the Inland Revenue Amendment number 7, Bill 2017. I believe that we have had in-depth discussions on this. I think it's relatively straightforward. It seeks to introduce the two-tier profits tax regime for UBs and corporations. For corporations, there is a 8.25%, half of the 16.5%, and for UBs, which are mostly in the form of partnerships and sole proprietorships, that will be 7.5%, and that is for sole proprietorships and partnerships as half of the present 15%. To avoid double benefits, the two-tiered profit tax system will not apply to those who have elected to have a half tax. For example, professional reinsurance companies, captive insurance companies, and corporate treasury centers and aircraft leasing companies. And also, it will not be applicable to the assessable profits for sums received by or accrued to holders of QDIs as interest gain or profit, for which are already taxed at half rate, 7.5%. To plug any tax regime loophole, the bill also specifies that for connected entities, only one enterprise should be nominated to enjoy the tax concession. These are the technical amendments as put forward in the bill, but I must ask this. How come that we have this bill? What is the policy intent of this bill? Of course, in March last year, when the chief executive was still a candidate for the CE election, I knew about her suggestion back then. But what is the objective of such a proposal? The lower profits tax rate will definitely lessen the tax burden of some enterprises like SMEs and startups, and it can also boost our competitive edge, drive economic growth, and create a favorable business environment.
Looking at our statistics for tax-paying corporations, for tax that can be saved if it has a profit of $2 million. That will mean $165,000 saved. And why aren't we targeting at smaller and newer enterprises and providing the concession? I have thought long, should it be across the board concession, and should I support the amendment bill? I have pondered long, and if the purpose of if the proposal would require a lot of examination. Now, the C-elect, I have provided a counter proposal to this new tax regime by the CE. For instance, you can set a certain level of profits. Enterprises which make less below that threshold will be entitled to the lowest tax rate. For UB and incorporated business, if the profit is slightly higher than that threshold, for instance, more than 2 million but lower than 3 million, then it can be subject to another profits tax rate. And of course, there will be the concession will be lost as profits increase. This is this is a reference from the UK system. However, it's been found in the UK that it is rather non-cost effective. And I've heard views that, for instance, can we apply the half rate to non-listed companies only? However, we understand that some non-listed companies have big business turnover, making huge profits. So after thorough consideration, I believe I have to support this proposal, not because it has a very clear policy objective. Still, this new regime will be able to help SMEs and startups. And as I said in the government's strategical brief, the low tax rates will be able to lower the burden of social enterprises and give them some help. The two-tier regime will enhance the international community's understanding of our tax regime. My counter proposal is a bit complicated. I'm willing to adjust it because after all, Hong Kong, I hope that Hong Kong is still a place with a low and simple tax regime. But I think if we want to make this a selling point of Hong Kong, the government will have to make some adjustment. Madam Deputy, I think you have noted that we are now examining the Inner Revenue Amendment number 7 bill, and there may be number 8 and number 9 in the pipeline. We want a fair, open, and transparent tax regime that is in alignment with international practice. And I'd like to remind the administration as to why our tax regime is competitiveness. Yes, it is low, and it's also because of the territorial-based taxation regime. This is unique in the world. Singapore has a system which may be a little bit close to ours, but apart from Singapore, we're the only territory with this system. I understand that the international community has some discussion with regard to our territorial-based taxation regime. I hope that the government can lobby the central government into supporting this model. This territorial-based taxation regime has not been created in recent decades. In fact, starting from day one, that was already our system. The intention was not to compete with other jurisdictions or to get their business. In fact, we have no intention to make Hong Kong a tax haven, because we are an advanced economy and also international financial center. We have to introduce new tax reforms as required by the international community. In particular, we must enhance our transparency and promote cooperation with the international community. I hope the administration can expedite its comprehensive double tax avoidance of double taxation agreement with other jurisdictions. Of course, some jurisdictions may not want this. They only want an agreement on exchange of tax information. However, I have to urge the administration, we can only protect countries. We have to we can only protect the confidence of trading partners of Hong Kong by means of having comprehensive agreement on avoidance of double taxation. We will see $5.8 billion in tax revenue forgone in passing this bill. We have about $130 billion of fiscal surplus in this year. Is this revenue forgone worth the money? Will it encourage more international investors to come to Hong Kong as a result of our low taxes? Will it be an attraction point for them to set up businesses in Hong Kong? I hope that 2 years after the implementation of this bill, the administration can survey the number of new companies that have come to Hong Kong to set up businesses and headquarters as a result of this new incentive. And it's not enough to look at the number of new companies. We also have to see the number of companies that have left Hong Kong in the same period. As I said, when we debated the number 4 bill, I said that we have provided various incentives. Please don't mind my being a bit long-winded. I spoke in English in the number 4 bill debate because the target was foreign investors, whereas for this bill, both local and overseas investors are at stake. So I hope 2 years after the commencement of the bill, there can be a detailed report to the Financial Affairs panel of this council so that we can see the economic benefits brought to us by means of different tax concessions. For instance, we may have a certain number of fund investment companies set up as a result of a number 4 bill, and with the health rate tax regime, how many new startups we have in Hong Kong as a result. In the long term, I have some aspirations for the tax ambience of Hong Kong. Now, how come an individual and corporation are both doing business in Hong Kong? Why is it that if you're a corporation, you have to pay 60.5%? If it is a sole proprietor or it is partnership, is 15%. Well, you may say that the income tax in Hong Kong is 15%, and we set the tax rates for UBs at 15%. We can avoid arbitrage. But these two groups are doing business in Hong Kong. Corporations have higher compliance costs, and yet they have to pay a higher tax rate, and this is baffling. Now, for personal income, the tax rate is 15%, and you want the tax rate for UBs to be roughly similar to avoid arbitrage. Now, to be a bit more farsighted, I think we should standardize our profits tax rate to 15%, whether it be for corporations or UBs, and the personal income tax rate should also be 15% to avoid arbitrage, and then people won't have to operate as UBs. This will save us a lot of trouble. Of course, a reduction of the profits tax rate by 1.5% is a big move, and this is going to impact on our tax base. Well, when we talked about widening our tax base, some people may be anxious. Are we going to introduce new taxes? But we need a stable and a long-term wide tax base, and we need to continue with our low and simple tax regime. The two are not contradictory. I hope that the administration can see whether the two can can coexist. With these remarks, I support the bill.
Mr. Kwok Wai Keung. Well, when I was asking a question at the beginning, my microphone wasn't working, and there were some concerns. But now that is fine. It's found that my microphone is working fine. This is a proposal to adjust the profits tax rates from 16.5% to 50% of the rates applied. This was announced in the policy address last year, so it's not really related to the budget. However, Mr. Ray Chan links this with the cash handout to everyone in Hong Kong. The FTU is the first body to ask for cash handout to everyone in Hong Kong. However, government officials have this mindset that you can only get cash handout if you pay tax. But this is erroneous, because majority of revenue of the government comes from stamp duty and revenue from sales of land, and that is actually contributed by all of Hong Kong people. Say, for example, when you buy a flat, where you have to pay rates, you have to pay property management fees. And even for people without a flat, they suffer because they have to pay high rent. So if the fruit of our labor are to be shared, it has to be shared by everyone. The FTU is of the view that if we still get bogged down on cash handout to everyone, then you need to deal with this problem. Out of the $43 billion of relief measures, are they to be retracted so that cash handouts can be made? We do think that the demand for cash handout is not realistic. What we ask for is that measures should be rolled out to make sure that everyone benefit in one way or another. I'm going to come back to this point. Well, lots of people say that, when people fight for rights of employees, bosses or employers will try to get in the way. This time, Mrs. Carrie Lam wants to cut profits tax rate. For under $2 million of profit, the rate will be halved. Well, all enterprises will benefit from it. But the FTU asked, if that's how the boss treats you, how would you treat the boss? We will support this proposed tax concessionary measure. Well, we want to send a message that employers and employees are not always on the opposing side. And there is room, where there is room to improve employment benefits, say for example, to increase your wage, to reduce your working hours, not to be so mean to your workers, that's fine. We have to be positive. We hope that this measure will benefit SMEs, which will in turn trickle down to employees. And I would like to talk about Hong Kong's tax system. Well, the tax bands of salaries tax will be increased from 4 to 5. People will think that, well, the more you earn, the more tax you pay. However, when it comes to profits tax, and there is no such thing. It was an across the board 16.5%. So for enterprises making $10 million, well, should there be another tax rate by increasing it by say 0.1 or 0.2%? Now there is a two-tier tax regime, but it is a downward adjustment, so there is no equity. For those making huge profits, they don't mind paying another 1% in profits tax. So the more you earn, the more tax you pay, and the government will be able to have more revenue. And I would to talk about, Hong Kong's tax system. Some people say that in order to maintain our competitiveness, we need a low tax regime because that is attractive. But is it the case that if you have a low tax regime, people will come to Hong Kong? Can they make money? If they can't make money and even suffer a loss, they would not come to Hong Kong even with a low tax regime. So they have to see Hong Kong as somewhere where there is potential, where they can make money. And they will be happy to pay 1 or 2% more in tax. So it's not so simple as offering them a low tax regime and everything will come into place. For Taiwan, profits tax is 20%, Korea 25%, mainland 25%. There are enterprises, there is recurrent revenue, investors don't mind going there. And if you say low tax regime is superior, then all companies would come to Hong Kong and not go next door. If companies make more money, they don't mind paying a bit more in tax. If they want to attract investors, the most important thing is to show them that they are able to make a profit. It's not that you charge them a lower tax rate. The administration wants to use this simplistic approach so as to evade their responsibility. That's my understanding. The administration reckons that there will be a revenue foregone of about $5.8 billion, which is about 4% of total revenue, because last year we have received from profits tax about $120 billion. If a company makes $2 million, then the company will be able to save about $160,000 a year. A lot of enterprises make under $1 million, so they save about $80,000 a year. It's not a substantial sum, but the employers have the obligation to help employees. Well, they talk about promoting innovation and technology, and it's not an easy task. We do think that small enterprises and startups should get assistance. If it's in the form of a reduced tax rate, it is a small help. Startups encounter a major problem: high cost, mainly coming from rent. You can make adjustments by employing one fewer person, but when it comes to office space, you need the space. So the administration needs to think about rent. If you want to help startups, you maybe need to find a place and charge startups a smaller rent so that they can do research or whatever they do. Well, rent is a major obstacle. Someone talks about large corporations breaking up their businesses. Well, even without doing so, they benefit, because for the first $2 million in profit, they enjoy a lower tax rate. Well, in case someone does do that, we ask the Inland Revenue Department to do more, to ask more questions, ask questions about relations amongst different companies. And there should be heavy penalty in case of abuse. A political party representing business sector said that enterprises with profits of over $2 million, can the tax rates be reduced to can tax rates be adjusted back to 2004? That is about 14%. We do think that companies making more profit will have bigger social responsibility. We do hope that corporate social responsibility should be shouldered by employers and not be discarded. We support the amendment, but we hope that companies making more than $10 million in profit should be subject to progressive tax rate. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Kwokaki. Madam Deputy, when we discussed the Inland Revenue Amendment number 4 bill, I had shared this thought. I'm going to repeat it here. For whatever tax reform to be implemented by a jurisdiction, it has to go by certain philosophies and principles. And I don't get what this bill is about. If you are to help the startups, the proposed tax rate is not there to help the startups, but rather helping everybody. For enterprises making $2 million above in profits, there are some 111,000 enterprises which are going to benefit. Then they talk about helping the SMEs. And so irrespective of the size of the SMEs, all SMEs will benefit. That's all right for offering tax concession, but it must come with good reasoning. The government has earlier proposed some tax concessions, say for the telecommunications and communications industry. For IT, then that's the target there is very specific, IT enterprises. And also, the government maybe say that if enterprises employ people with physical disability or intellectual disability, or you hire disadvantaged groups, then tax concessions will be offered. And then that's all right. But you're talking about this $2 million to the big enterprises. Well, that means nothing to them. I've read through some reports, newspaper reports. Some bosses of big enterprises said that the amount saved won't be able to allow him to hire a personal driver. And for the big conglomerates, they don't care about this tax savings. But for the SMEs and the micro enterprises, they said something otherwise. They said they make a little every month, just around $30,000 to $40,000, just enough to make ends meet. I need you to help me more. But then the government said that I'm treating everyone alike. Even if you are making a loss, you're making just 10,000, 20,000, then you will be given the same treatment. There is no good reasoning for this approach. There is no good target for this. The second thing, which is even more dangerous, the government is using poison to poison itself. If you look, I've looked through the papers. After the handover, there was the first discussion on widening the tax base. That took place in 2000 and 2001. The government then listed many reasons for widening the tax base. They said that Hong Kong is facing an unsustainable financial situation because the tax base was too narrow. The recurrent income, including those from profits tax, salaries tax, etc., took up only around 30% of the total revenue. And other income sources were fluctuating. For example, revenue from land sale, land premium, stamp duty, investment on operating expenses. And these types of income fluctuated a lot. So in the past 20 years, the government has been launching a number of policies. They said that the narrow tax base will endanger us. And so should we be considering the GST, general sales tax? And it has also said that for the different tax categories, should something more be done? And even for this current term government, in Paul Chan's last budget, he said that we should come up or form a tax reform unit to study into widening the tax base. I think the government is suffering from schizophrenia. For the tax policies, if they have good objectives, say, I want to help the startups, and that would be a good objective. Say, if a startup, say, in the first 3 or 5 years operation, then they are considered as startups. In the first year, maybe more help could be afforded to them. Or you can say that we want to help with the SMEs and micro enterprises. So maybe there should be a 70% tax concession for the first $200,000 in profits, $500,000 to $750,000, maybe 75% in tax concession. But if, say, you make over $1 million, then you will not be considered as a micro enterprise. No, not a lot of enterprises can make profit to that tune. So enterprises are bound to pay tax if they earn a profit, and the society has to progress. But then, if the government says that I would like to, through tax concessions, encourage the enterprises or the employers to use the saved tax in the society, maybe cut down on the work hours of the employees, or maybe even buy more medical insurance for their employees, offer more welfare benefits to employees, or even encourage their employees to pursue further studies, then these are ways that you can consider. But then the government is now taking across-the-board approach. The Carrie Lam assumed office last year, and the first thing that she said to the business sector, that sweeteners will be given out to you. So there is no sound philosophy at all behind all these. There is no goal to be achieved. Now, if we want to build a fair society, well, it's not a bad thing that you give money to the business sector. But what about the groups which can't benefit from your measures? How would you treat them? Let's not talk about those on CSSA recipients, because don't go into the discussion of that matter. But rather, people have to be self-reliant on them in Hong Kong. For this group of people, they are in a plight. When the tax base is getting narrower, which means that the government intentionally or unintentionally is biased towards getting revenue from the business sector and the property sector. Mr. Abraham Shek, yes, let me remind you, Dr. Kwok Ka-ki, that you should come back to this subject matter. You're digressing. Now, I'm talking about this tax amendment bill. Abraham Shek would say that it's the government who benefits most from the prosperous property market. The government is the largest property developer, and the government is helping to speculate on land prices and jacking up land prices. I don't see how you are helping the SMEs. Now you are giving tax concessions to the SMEs, but then you must have some other ways to earn the revenue. Maybe you are getting extra $3 or $5 in the rental, because the entire public finance system will hinge more on the state of the property market. So this is the poison that I'm referring to. Dr. Kwok. Maybe several weeks later we'll have a debate on the budget. Maybe you can save your remarks for that session. Now, I'm coming back here. It's $2 million, this reduction in profits tax. That measure won't be able to help Hong Kong enterprises and SMEs. On the one hand, they seem to be profiting or, gaining a benefit. But on the other hand, they're losing out on some other aspects. As to how we should help enterprises, there are so many ways of doing it. I was talking about IT companies. Has the government considered encouraging the companies to enhance their efficiency, use more automation, or, say, for example, can we do more with environmental protection, reduce emissions, etc.? This is a win-win approach adopted by many other jurisdictions. The government has quoted some figures saying that Hong Kong must compare ourselves against other in terms of the CIT rates. United Kingdom, Singapore, and other places should be compared with Hong Kong. Let's not forget, in Singapore, say, for example, the combined CIT rate is 70%, but let's not forget in Singapore, there is employers are asked to pay a high contribution towards the mandatory provident fund, and this is a hidden cost which is very high. Now, say for example, U.S. The U.S. government is reducing the federal CIT rates, but then the state CIT rates are still remain on the high side. But would people opt for other places to do their business? Not necessarily, because in selecting a place to run their business, the enterprise will make their own calculations. The business people are very smart. They opt for Hong Kong. For example, of mainland, the profit tax is 25%. Hong Kong is far behind that rate. And also, we have a sound legal system. That's another advantage. We try to reduce the profit tax rate. We are biased towards the businessmen. And who is to suffer ultimately? It's the government and all members of the public. Because in terms of public finance, the government has been sticking to this very clear principle. Maybe there has been a change this year, and the recurrent expenditure should not exceed 20% of the GDP. But this year, it has exceeded that level. And as the population ages and there is a larger group of silver-haired population in Hong Kong, there will be a greater demand for various social welfare services, for example, welfare and medical. So let me remind you that you have to come back to this subject. I've got only 3 minutes left. There is no need for you to remind me again. So we are heading towards, we are heading towards a direction which is even better, poorer. Now, a total of around $6 billion will be saved. Is this a small amount or not? Even if we are to pay for all the cancer drugs, we need less than $6 billion. We won't be seeing people depleting all their savings to buy target therapy drugs. And they can only get treated if they have financial means. So there are serious implications or far-reaching implications in whatever you do with public finance. So for such a measure, what long-term benefits will it bring to Hong Kong? There are no statistics here in the paper. The government says that it will create a favorable business environment. Well, please give us the data to prove that. You said that you would attract investors, you would attract multinational corporations to operate in Hong Kong, etc. Now, if those who can really make a profit, they won't mind about such petty measure, and you can really help those you want to help. And then if you really are keen to help the micro enterprises, this sweeping cross-the-board approach is unfair. And the less profit they make, the more help they deserve from you. Say, if they make, say, $1 million per year, then that's no small amount. They don't need your assistance. But honestly, if you tell the businessmen, say, well, I'll give you the money, then they are more than happy to receive it. They are very money-minded. So people like Mr. Jeffrey Lam will ask for even more from the government. They would ask that a profit tax rate be cut continuously. And maybe you shouldn't use a yardstick of $2 million or even $200 million should be used as a yardstick. Now, they are not giving us a long-term objectives in all these tax reform measures, and there is no impact whatsoever for such measure. You are giving sweetness to the rich people, and that doesn't make sense. I'm not against the government giving money to the SMEs and micro enterprises, but you have to help them, offer real help to them. There is so much more that you should do. Well, let's steer Hong Kong back on the right track. Let's not have the high land price policy anymore, and should not be getting a majority of our income from land sale. And the government must muster up the courage to launch some reforms. If you just want to cozy up to a certain sector, you are bound to fail in your efforts.
Mr. Jeffrey Lam, thank you. President, I didn't speak too long, and I plan to speak on this subject entirely. But having heard Dr. Kwok Ka-Ki's speech, I have to clarify a few points because we must not allow speculations, and in particular those remarks he referred to me. In fact, I never said such things, and I think he was lying and also misleading the community. And he quoted from members' speeches out of context. They were neither true nor correct. I've heard what other members said, and then it was not entirely not what Dr. Kwok Ka-Ki said. Well, I hope that in this council we can really take care of the concerns of our people, and we should focus on the current subjects and not digress too much. As a member representing the General Chamber of Commerce, if I remember correctly, starting from 2008, we're already proposing to cut the profits tax rate for SMEs. In recent years, whenever there was a public consultation on the budget, the General Chamber of Commerce had time and again appealed to the government to put in place a two-tiered profits tax rate regime. After 10 years, finally, the new government has given the green light to a two-tier profits tax rate, and then the tax rates have been cut by half, and this is very well received by the business sector. We understand that a lower tax rates would be conducive to our competitiveness and business environment. And I note that there is a survey among accountants who feel that our tax rates is a positive factor for Hong Kong, and that would increase their confidence in Hong Kong. We've written articles, and we have submitted proposals to the government, and we have sent to the media, and we have elaborated on the advantages of a two-tier profits tax rates regime. First, paying lower tax will lessen the tax burden of an SME. Let's say originally the tax, the profit is $2 million. Then under the new system, you will have to pay $160,000 less in tax, and that would benefit everyone. As DFS said, 80% of our SMEs are making a profit of less than $2 million, so they're going to benefit most from the new arrangement. And the money saved can create more value. Over $100,000 more can be spent on new equipment to enhance efficiency. For instance, they can buy a faster computer, they can increase the wages of employees or employ few more workers, and there will be better cash flow for SMEs. It's not that SMEs don't have money, but it takes time for them to raise funds, and by paying less tax, that means more cash left with SMEs, and it will be easier for them to take out loans. So to lower the tax rate for the first $2 million, this will mean a lot to startups. Usually, at the initial stage of a startup, you only incur expenses, you have little revenue, and when you start to make a little profit, you have to pay a standard tax rate, and this will lengthen the break-even time. So for the first $2 million, the rate is 8.25%. This will create a more favorable environment and ensure the viability of startups. We have been encouraging the mainland and overseas companies to set up headquarters in Hong Kong. The double-tier system will make Hong Kong more attractive to these multinational corporations. Many companies would like to grasp the business opportunities of the Belt and Road Initiative and the Bay Area, and this system will be very attractive. the cost of setting up headquarters in Hong Kong will be lower. I expect more companies to establish themselves in Hong Kong. This will promote our economic development and also development of other sectors. In addition to introducing a two-tier profits tax rates regime, we should keep reviewing our tax competitiveness and business environment. Many places have lowered their profits tax rates again and again. Our competitive edge as a low tax regime is losing its edge. In the summit on New Direction on taxes last year, speakers on stage and the floor agreed that our tax regime must be reformed to keep up with times. I hope that with the two-tier system in place, we can further consider lower the overall tax rates, and the 183 residence day should also be waived.
Mr. Lo Wai Kwok, I was not able to directly participate in the Bills Committee of this amendment bill because of I was otherwise engaged. However, BPL have participated in the scrutiny of the bill. Mr. Christopher Cheung was a member of the Bills Committee. A two-tier profits tax rate regime will be put in place for corporations and unincorporated operations under Cap 112, the Inland Revenue Ordinance. But for 2016-17, profits tax stands as $139 billion, which is about a quarter of total revenue of Hong Kong. So profits tax has always been a large, is the major revenue for Hong Kong. Current profits tax rate for corporations stands at 16.5% and for unincorporated businesses 15%. Hong Kong's economic development relies on development in commerce and industry. Hong Kong's advantage should be strengthened, and at the same time, new development areas should be explored. Our industries should be supported, and assistance should be given to build new industries. Barriers should be removed, and SMEs need to be propped up. The administration has taken on board our suggestion to alleviate tax burden of SMEs and to encourage them to reinvest profits. The Chief Executive, Mrs. Carrie Lam, in her first policy address, announced measures to help the business sector as well as to improve people's livelihood. A number of tax proposals to reduce tax burdens have been made. A two-tier profits tax rate regime is put forward by her. For the first $2 million, tax rates have been reduced to 8.25% and 7.5%. And there are also suggestions, and there is also a measure to encourage R&D investments by giving them tax concessions. We welcome these initiatives. In the budget, the financial secretary said that R&D for the first $2 million R&D of enterprises, there will be a 300% of tax deduction. The remaining amount, there will be a 200% tax deduction. We hope that these measures will be implemented as soon as possible. For the first $2 million of profits under the two-tier profits tax rates regime, for corporations it will be charged at 8.25%. For anything beyond that, it will be at 16.5% for unincorporated businesses. It will stand at 7.5% for the first 2 million and 15% thereafter. It will come into effect on the day to be gazetted. We have low tax regime and free market. Our economy has been booming. But we are a free economy that is externally oriented. Our economy is very sensitive. We have been hearing a lot of voices of protectionism as well as voices to protect our own economy. In the U.S., we hear a recent announcement that for profits tax for enterprises be reduced to 21%, and in the UK by 2020 this will be reduced to 17%. Federal Reserve will normalize the monetary policy. This will bring uncertainty to the external economic environment. With such changes and servicing challenges, the administration should be more proactive. There should be targeted tax concessionary measures offered, including cutting of profits tax rate. For enterprises that have to pay tax, about 82.4%, that is 119,000 enterprises with accessible profit, with an accessible profit of $2 million. A lot of them are SMEs and startups. There are also restrictions imposed. For connected companies, there needs to be one nomination only. It shows that whilst maintaining the low tax regime, an equilibrium is maintained. For corporations and unincorporated businesses, they can save $165,000 and $150,000 respectively. The Bills Committee in general support the proposals and the CSAs. The Bills Committee will not move any amendments. This shows that there is consensus forged. Against this background, I ask members here to support the passage of this bill. I myself and people from the commerce and industry sector will ask the administration to continue to monitor changes in the external economic environment and make timely adjustments to our tax regime to remove barriers and to create a favorable business environment. I so submit.
Dr. Fernando Zhang, President, I speak to object to the Inland Revenue Amendment Number 7, Bill 2016, and that is the amendment to put in place a two-tier profits tax regime in Hong Kong. A tax system is a very important tool for the government to distribute wealth. The government has the duty to study into how wealth is created in Hong Kong and also be mindful of the wealth gap in Hong Kong. So, for the rich people who can make a profit in the market, tax should be levied on them, and then the money should be, say, given to the poor, the disadvantaged, for those who earn less. In a modern capitalist society, this is a basic responsibility of the government and is also an important role of the government. If we want to look at whether our tax system is in line with that kind of thinking, we will have to look at whether the new policy will reduce the wealth gap And in the terms of the wealth distribution in Hong Kong, will there be more fairness? Second, as to this tax concession, is it necessary for us? The profits tax are already on the low side, 16.5%. Compared to our neighboring regions, I don't see our profits tax are higher compared to others. As we all know, Hong Kong has always have a simple low tax regime. 16.5% has remained the same over many years. Let's look at how the situation is like in other countries. Singapore, 70% higher than ours. On the mainland, 25%. If we have to have a two-tier system in Australia, 30% is the rate, or 27.5%. Japan, 29.97%. It's close to 30%. For the low profit earners, they are charged 15%, and we now have 16.5%. Are we already lower than others, or are we higher than others? I think we're very competitive in our profits tax rate, so I don't see the need to do the to launch this measure, given our economic growth this year and the past year and the past 5 years. I don't see any need for us whatsoever to cut tax to stimulate the economy and stimulate investment. The economic growth in the past year has been very healthy for an advanced economy. You've got a 3% growth. That's already very good. So why the need to further cut the tax under such a low tax regime? And you're giving favors to the businessmen. The businessmen are earning a profit, and they are making more and more. So if you have profits, naturally you must pay tax. So this is an important function that I mentioned at the outset. Whether it's the individual, we earn some money, then we have to pay tax, so that the government can use the needed resources to help improve the quality of living of the society as a whole, and especially more help should be given to the disadvantaged group. The government likes to say this. We have to focus our efforts to help those in need, but this is not what you're doing now. You are focusing your efforts to help those conglomerates who are already making very good profits. You said that you want to help the SMEs. That's a good thing, but can you really help them? Hong Kong now has 1.3 million registered companies. How many companies are paying tax? Mr. Paul Chan said around 100,000 or so are paying tax. And are they big companies or SMEs? Well, please give us a breakdown. Tell us clearly that among the 100,000 enterprises which are going to benefit from this two-tiered system, and they will be saving up $165,000. What are these companies? Are they employing less than 50 people? I believe that is not the case. Honestly, for the 100,000 companies, the bulk of them are not SMEs, I believe. If we are talking about companies employing 50 people or more, there are 50,000 such companies. So for these 50,000 companies, since they're not SMEs, are they making a loss? No, I don't think very few of them are making a loss. And that takes up over half of the 100,000 companies that are paying tax. So does it mean that the SMEs will benefit from the measure and then the big enterprises will not benefit? That's obviously not the case. The measure is not that you will only benefit from this two-tier system when you make less than $2 million. This measure will benefit everyone, who makes the profit. You're just giving a lower tax rate to the first $2 million of profit. Why do you have to benefit those who don't need your favor? The big conglomerates are making tens of billions of dollars. Say like the MTRC is making $10 billion a year. What's the point of giving them $160,000? So this is meaningless. Such resources should actually be used to help the disadvantaged group. Why don't you do universal retirement protection? Why can't you build more hospitals? Why can't you hire more doctors and build more schools, provide free education to young people, build more elderly homes, homes for the disabled? How come that the PWDs have to wait for 16, 17 years to wait for a place? You are talking about a revenue foregone of $5.8 billion. That's quite an amount already. It can do a lot in terms of providing, say, hostel services for for kids. Some kids are subject to domestic violence, and they cannot be housed in a residential home, and they've been sent to hospitals. And at the Committee on Children's Rights, we discovered that there are so many children in acute hospitals overstaying in the hospitals because not enough residential places are there to accommodate these children. So the children have to overstay in the hospital because there is no residential care home for them. So why don't you use this $5.8 billion to build children's homes? Well, this morning we discussed the Caroline Hill Road sites with an area of 20,000 square meters, which on which two Hazen Place blocks or something similar can be built. You will be devoting half of the space for this district. This is a GIC site. They planned to demolish the buildings and then turn it into a commercial site. If you just allocate half of the site for GIC facilities, you can resolve many problems immediately. So this is the use that can be put to the $5.8 billion. It's not the case that you lack the money, you lack the land. No, the site has been left vacant for 10 years. We allow the site to lie idle. Every time we asked you to build more elderly homes or homes for other disadvantaged groups, you told us that there is no land. But then we are flushed with money. We have a lot of land. This should not be what a responsible government should do. You have to allocate resources. You should help those in need in the community. Well, you are returning the money to stimulate economy. No businessman will ever say that you are giving us too much money. Of course, the Liberal Party is happy with this measure. They would even ask for the 16.5% to be further slashed. You are flushed with money year after year, but this is money coming from every member of the public. Why are we flushed with money? Because of your high land price policy, and we are relying too much on the financial and the property sectors, and as a result, now for a pineapple bun that we buy for $5, $2.5 goes to the rental. Everybody lives in subdivided units, and elderly people have to live in subdivided units in their twilight years. This is a price that we are paying. Well, we don't even have enough burial ground. So this is a price that everybody is asked to pay. The government has all this administrative power, and you are also monopolizing your legislative power. Today, the legislature can't exercise checks and balance on you, and you are helping the profit-making companies here. Mr. Jeffrey Lam said that they can buy an extra computer with the money saved. But what we are talking about here is life-saving measures. We should pay more, spend more on cancer drugs, therapy drugs, drugs for uncommon diseases. But you tell us that you lack money. Isn't that very ridiculous? Now, you make these enterprises happy. They can have, say, $100,000 more. They can buy a new computer. But then on the other side, it's a matter of life and death. They have the drugs, but they can't afford it. The whole family is plunged into misery because of the patient's condition, and the patient thinks that he is a burden. He poses a burden to the whole family. Is this kind of public finance philosophy that the government has? Hong Kong's tax system is well known for its low tax rates. So why don't you make the best use of the resources that you gather through the tax system? So why don't you, are you taking money away from the poor to give to the rich? This is unfair allocation, and you are now redistributing the wealth through the tax system. It's even more unfairness is created. The more you give out, the poorer the people get. Why don't you give out the drugs? Why don't you pay for the hospitals, nurses, doctors, etc.? Why do you have to pay or give money to companies who are already making a profit? You help them to gain more from that business. I'm not at odds against the business sector. I'm not against the business sector. I'm not overturning the capitalist system. But at least you should take a fairer approach, a more just approach in allocating our resources. Every time you are going the other way, the reverse way, you are helping the rich people. Now you're also waiving the rates. They are helping the rich people, in effect. The same applies here. If you are to help the SMEs, at least you say that only those who make a profit of less than $2 million will benefit. But for those who are making more than $2 million, their tax rate should not be cut. The rich people won't thank you for your proposal or measure. But at the same time, the poor people have to wait, say, for 10 hours to get to see a doctor, even if they are in urgent cases. The elderly people are rag pickers and are living in subdivided units. And the private elderly homes are in poor conditions. Is this the kind of Hong Kong that we want to see? You are benefiting the rich people through the tax system. Is this what you want to do? Totally unnecessary to implement this. So I speak to object to the Inland Revenue Amendment Bill. So I speak.
Mr. Felix Chung. President, the Liberal Party, of course, support the two-tier profits tax rates regime. In particular, most enterprises in Hong Kong, SMEs, I dare not say that they are making a lot of money, and I dare not say that they are non-viable. Otherwise, they won't have survived. On average, it's normal for them to earn around $1 million. But if we cut the tax rates, they can earn more, and this can benefit the economy. The labor sector has been calling businessmen unscrupulous. Let me tell you that many SMEs are really not making enough to pay their employees. They have to mortgage their properties. They have to spend all their savings and investment hoping to do their business properly. I think it is a good incentive to help the SMEs. Dr. Fernando Cheung said that the Liberal Party would want us to waive the profits tax altogether. No, we are not going to say that. We are saying that the profits tax rates should be cut from 16.5% to 15%. Why do I say so? Because more than a decade ago, when we had the SARS outbreak, well, back then the tax rate was 15%, but then the government asked the business sector to help in view of the financial difficulties. Profitable businesses could you please pay a little bit more? And so the tax rate was increased to 16.5%. This year we have over $100 billion in surplus. Next year, 40, and then still the year after is $40 billion. In the coming 5 years, even if we disregard the possibility, which is very high, of a wrong estimate, we're going to make huge profits in the future. So I think it is most reasonable that you return some of that to the business sector. We have over $4 trillion in fiscal reserves and surplus. Cutting tax and returning the profits tax rate to 15% is most reasonable. This is just for the government to honor its commitment to the business sector when the profits tax rate was raised from 15 to 16.5%. Some members talked about the global economies, and all advanced economies are cutting tax. 16.5% in Hong Kong is not very attractive, but the two-tier system this time is most attractive to startups and emerging industries. They will be attracted to invest in Hong Kong. 8.25% is, relatively speaking, the lowest in the world. There are merits in cutting tax. It may appear in surface that the government is collecting less tax, but if more enterprises are attracted to come to Hong Kong, that would boost economic activities and create more jobs, and in the end, we may end up having more tax revenue. So this is not really a negative move. Dr. Fernando, how come the $5.8 billion forgone and used for building more elderly homes and hospitals? This is entirely true. Given that Hong Kong is such a prosperous city, there is no reason why people should wait for 15 hours at an A in the department to see a doctor. Problem is not that we don't have money, we don't have personnel. Even if with the hardware, we don't have the software. Even if you have money, you cannot hire the personnel you need. The news just said today that for the hospital authority, they are hiring healthcare personnel at hourly rates, and they have the highest proportion at all times nowadays. Doctors feel that if their life would be much easier if they go to private practice. So you will see a further manpower shortage in hospitals, and you have to wait for even longer than 15 hours. And there must be importation of talents before we can address this problem. This is not about whether we have money or not, and $5.8 billion cannot resolve the problem because we have a software problem. We lack manpower. All right, that $5.8 billion can be spent on building elderly homes, true, but they may not be meant. Next year, the Children's Hospital will be commissioned, but we are now 200 doctors short. So even though we have a new hospital, we have no doctors to serve there. Yes, it is proper for the business sector to pay tax, and it is the government's responsibility to redistribute wealth. That's why society has such high expectations for the current budget. We all know that we are sitting on huge surplus, and a redistribution of wealth can benefit the community. But of course, there are people who get nothing from this budget, and therefore we are queuing up to ask the FS to hand out cash. Some political parties say 2,000, some 4,000, and I don't mind handing out 5,000 per individual. Now, the business sector has paid their due in giving tax, so it is not the business sector's responsibility. A two-tier profit tax regime has nothing to do with the financial burden of the administration. The labor sector and the social welfare sector should not criticize the business sector for not paying more. And please don't think that this is a zero-sum game if the business sector pays less tax. So this must be clarified. And lastly, bear with me, if the since the SL government has got close to $4,000 to $1 trillion in, or to $100 billion in surplus, you should cut the tax rate for the business sector to resort to the previous level.
Mr. Shiu Ka-fai, I wasn't going to speak because, the head of our party has just spoken. However, I really don't agree with what the other member has said, that we know that over 99% of enterprises in Hong Kong are SMEs. That includes newspaper vendors, for family business working from dawn to dusk. And they only make about $10,000 or so. How come we should not help them? They painted a picture saying that the business sector is unscrupulous. Well, how much money in the budget has been spent on those in need? Has the business sector come out to say no to that? No. How often do they do something to benefit the business sector? This is only a small gesture. The business sector has been paying a lot of tax, and this proposal goes a long way to the business sector. Dr. Fernando Zhang wants to garner support from his voters. That's fine, but he should not say something that is not true, saying that, well, those people making $2 million, that is a lot of money. But he should make it clear, $2 million is where the line is drawn. And even for corporations making tens of billions of dollars, they still enjoy only the tax cut of the first $2 million. And that's meaningless. And that's all I want to say. Does any other member wish to speak? If not, I call upon the Secretary for Financial Services and the Treasury to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Mr. President, Inland Revenue Amendment Number 7, Bill 2017, seeks to amend the IRO to implement the two-tier profits tax regime put forward by this chief executive in the policy address last year. I thank the chairman, Holden Chow, and members of the Bills Committee for their efforts put in to complete the scrutiny of the bill. I've been listening very carefully to members' views. The policy objective of the administration is to maintain a low tax regime and put in place beneficiary measures to promote economic development. The bill proposes to lower the profits tax rate by half, that is for corporations, 8.25%, for unincorporated businesses, 7.5%. And beyond the first $2 million for corporations, the tax rate will stand at 16.5%, and for unincorporated businesses, it will stand at 15%. In order to ensure that enterprises benefited will be mainly SMEs, there are restrictions imposed. For corporations and groups, only one company may be nominated. At maximum, $165,000 and $150,000 can be saved. If 2% of the enterprises are connected entities, there will be tax revenue foregone for about $5.8 billion, which is about 4% of the total revenue in 2016-17.
But then enterprises might be able to boost their operation, scale of operation and efficiency, hoping to, and which in turn can bring in tax revenues in future. The Bills Committee has conducted an in-depth and thorough discussion of the bill, and I'd like to address 3 concerns raised by the Bills Committee. First, the policy objective and our target beneficiaries. In the course of deliberation, some members asked whether the 2-tier system should apply to businesses that engage in purchase and sale of properties. I'd like to say that we have measures such as buyer's stamp duty and special stamp duty put in place to cool down investment and speculative activities in the property market, regardless of whether the entities involved in property transaction are natural persons or companies. Besides, how an entity carries on its business or makes business is essentially a commercial decision of the entity concerned, and we proposed 2-tier system must not complicate our tax regime and undermine competitiveness. After all, we have a taxation system which is simple. And some members are also concerned as to how we define connected entities. Simply put, an entity is a connected entity of another entity if one of them has control over the other or both of them are under control of the same entity. Control generally refers to holding directly or indirectly more than 50% of the issued share capital, voting rights capital, or profits in another entity. Some members of the view that the restrictions imposed may complicate the profits tax system. However, to ensure that the tax policies would target SMEs, it is necessary to restrict the application of the 2-tier rates so that we can really benefit the SMEs. Some members just said, why should we use 50% as the cutoff point? Because we want our system to be simple, transparent, and easy to implement. So we believe 50% is a right choice. And to ensure that the beneficiaries of the 2-tier profits tax regime are mainly SMEs. Now, some members said that we should have an across-the-board application. In fact, for large corporations and smaller ones, we have different treatment. We have said here that we have the view that only one entity of connected entities can be nominated to benefit from the 2-tier system. So connected entities might have more than 100, but only one can benefit from the scheme. If we do not introduce this restriction, then multinational companies or listed companies with many entities can benefit from the system, and this is in line with the government's intention to benefit SMEs in the main. And we have provided a simple, clear, and objective definition for connected entities. This will help to minimize possible dispute between shareholders and a partnership. As regards people will abuse the system by means of business restructuring. We would like to say that business restructuring is a normal commercial activity, and different business setups, kind of divergent risk profiles, return on asset and cost structures, costs and benefits have to be carefully considered prior to an amalgamation of business, and that is a business decision. Besides, the ILD has got definition of associate to prevent abuse. Usually, they use the concept of relative. to prevent profits from shifting to companies controlled by relatives. For the purpose of the two-tier profits tax rate regime, the policy intent is to reduce the tax burden of all enterprises, especially SMEs, given that the members of the same family run different businesses independently. For instance, a father operates a Hong Kong-style cafe while his son operates a hair salon business. And we believe it is reasonable to apply the proposed lower tax rate to each of them. And then we've also discussed the tax treatment on income from qualified debt instruments, QDIs, or other business. To avoid double benefits of enterprises electing the existing preferential half-rate tax regime, such as professional insurance companies, captive insurance companies, corporate treasury centers, and aircraft leasing companies, they will be excluded from the proposed two-tier profits tax rates. Such corporation may be a standalone corporate engaging predominantly in relevant business. However, the standalone entity might be allowed to engage in other profit-generating business, but the percentage of profits from those activities should be less than 25%. Accessible profits from business unrelated to QDI would be chargeable to tax rates. QDIs are accessible profits for sums received by or accrued to holders of QDIs as interest gain or profits for which are already taxed at half rate will not be entitled to the benefit. I will further on move CSAs to state specifically that the profits from QDIs will not be counted towards the 2 million cap in the new Schedule 8A and 8B. Regarding suggestions on profits tax system, some members suggested that the administration should consider introducing a progressive tax rate of more tax base as a means to better enhance vertical equity or to narrow down disparity between the rich and the poor and to increase government revenue. In view of the international trend of reducing corporate tax rates, it would not be appropriate at this stage to consider the suggestion lest Hong Kong's competitive edge would be eroded. However, the Bureau will continue to study ways to broaden the tax base in the long term. Introduction of the two-tier profits tax rate regime can lower the tax burden on SMEs and is conducive to creating a favorable business environment, can foster economic growth and create jobs, and to raise Hong Kong's competitiveness. Enterprises can spend tax savings on upgrading their hardware and software, thereby boosting their overall operation and efficiency. The administration will keep in touch with stakeholders to formulate forward-looking tax policies and measures to promote our economic development. I have to respond to some comments made by members. Some members of the view that in this budget we have not taken care of the needs of different groups in society. In fact, when the budget was announced on the 28th of February, the Financial Secretary has set out in detail how we are going to invest in medical and health, drugs, and to take care of rare diseases, in social welfare, education, and R&T, innovation, and capital infrastructure. We're going to spend huge amount of money on these things. So we are proposing a two-tier profits tax rates regime for our businesses. This is not because we've forgotten our obligation to needs of society. The bill has the support of the Bills Committee. I urge members to support the passage of the bill to benefit enterprises. Thank you. I now put a question to you that the Inland Revenue Amendment number 7, Bill 2017 be read the second time. Will those in favor please raise their hands? Mr. Ray Chen claims a division. The division bell will run for 5 minutes.
開始表決。
Voting begins. Mr. Michael Tian, would you like to vote? Please check your votes. Voting's closed. The results are displayed. 50 present, 43 for, 6 against. The question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. In the Revenue Amendment number 7, Bill 2017, Council now becomes